Hi everybody, welcome to this new webinar, So You Think You're Green. Today with my colleague Joanna, we will speak about the environmental impacts of our spending choices. So while we wait for the participants to connect, I will give you just some practical information. So this webinar will last for about an hour. Then we will have a question and answer session. So you can ask your question, write them in the dedicated section of the GoToWebinar system on the right. So the webinar is recorded, and in a few days you will receive an email with the link to the video and also the presentation slides, and finally a satisfaction survey. So it will be really nice if you can fill and return this satisfaction survey. So this webinar is part of a series which is a project funded by the Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology and Fonds National de la Recherche Luxembourg. And again, today we speak about the environmental impacts of our spending choices. So now I will introduce ourselves. So Joanna and I, we are both researchers at the Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology, LIST. This is a public research center, and in our team, we are focusing on the sustainability evaluation of products and services. So this is done to support, in particular, public and private actors to make more sustainable choices. But today we are here to share this knowledge with you and help you to make more sustainable choices in your daily life. So we will open the first live poll. So through the presentation, we will have several live polls to increase a bit the interactivity with you, despite it's an online event. So the first question is to know if you already participated to one of the previous events. So we had one on the impacts of mobility, one on the impacts of housing, and the other on food impacts. So you can click either one of them, two of them, all of them, or none. So it takes a bit of time for the system to consider your answer, so it will just take a few seconds. Normally this should be an easy question to answer, so I hope you can answer fast and the system can consider all of your answers. So we are just a bit patient, and in a few seconds we will see the results of this first live poll. So when the system is ready, we can maybe show the results. Okay, so we have some faithful participants, but also some newcomers. So this is very nice. So welcome again to everybody. And now we can go back to the presentation. And so we will speak along this presentation about environmental impacts. And one of the most famous one is global warming, and it's related to the calculation of carbon footprint. So I will explain now this key concept that we will use along this presentation. So first, this is a graph showing on the horizontal axis the emissions of carbon dioxide, CO2, since the pre-industry, the first industrial revolution, sorry, at the end of the 19th century. And we see on the vertical axis the temperature change since this period. So we see that both are related. And in fact, CO2 is a greenhouse gas, so it will trap the heat in the atmosphere that is reflected by the Earth. So it's good to have greenhouse gases, to have a Earth on which we can live. But since the discovery of fossil fuels, we are increasing largely these emissions. And today, we have a global warming of about 1.4 degrees compared to the pre-industrial level. And we can already feel the consequences of this global warming, such as droughts in summer that have consequences like in agriculture in Luxembourg. So if we continue like this with this trend, we will reach a global warming of about 4 to 5 degrees by the end of the century. And this will cause dramatic consequences on human lives, because some regions will be not livable anymore because, for example, of the increase of sea level, or because of the extreme temperature or the lack of water. and it will also cause more human death because of more extreme weather events. So it's important to try to mitigate CO2 emission to mitigate this global warming. And each degree we can reduce are human lives that are at stake. So if we do extreme effort, we could keep the global warming below 2 degrees. And in fact, it's the objective that was set during the Paris Agreement to stay well below 2 degrees of global warming. It means that we cannot overpass a certain amount of CO2 emissions to stay below this target. And this is what we can call our carbon budget. So we cannot emit more than 900 gigatons of CO2 to stay below 2 degrees of global warming. So this CO2 is emitted when we are burning fossil fuels mainly. So the 3 fossil fuels are oil, natural gas, and coal. There is also some CO2 emissions from chemical reaction, in particular for the cement production. And also when we are cutting trees, we are releasing the captured carbon. But it's not the only greenhouse gas. We have also fluorinated gases that you have in your fridge or in your air conditioning system, but also N2O, dinitrogen oxide, and CH4, which is methane. Both are mostly emitted in agricultural activities. So all of these greenhouse gases, they do not have the same ability to trap the heat in the atmosphere. So what we will do to calculate the carbon footprint is to convert this greenhouse gas emission depending on the power to capture heat compared to the one of carbon dioxide for a period of 100 years. And this is how we have the unit of kilogram of CO2 equivalent. So for example, nitrogen monoxide has a power to capture heat which is 300 times more than the one of carbon dioxide. So we don't really burn coal in our house directly, but coal is used to produce electricity that is further used to, for example, for our lights or to run industrial machines, or we cut trees to have land available to grow crops. All of this is finally used to satisfy some services in terms of mobility, warmth, construction, food, etc. So when we calculate what we call the carbon footprint, we try to track all these greenhouse gas emissions that are necessary to provide a certain service. So we have done the exercise for a Luxembourg average resident. So here I will show you the tons of CO2 equivalent per year for a Luxembourgish resident for the different sectors. The first one being transport. So we have a lot of impact of transport in Luxembourg because we use a lot our cars. We also take quite a lot the plane. Then comes housing, and this is mainly due to the high energy usage in our house, especially in terms of heating via the combustion of natural gas. Then comes the category of consumption goods. Here we have a lot of different products, from hygiene products to clothes or electronics. Then comes the food. This is mainly driven by the consumption of meat. And finally, public services, because as a citizen, we benefit from the functioning of hospitals, army, the police, etc. So if we sum all of this, we reach a total of 14.5 tons of CO2 equivalent. While if we want to stay below 2 degrees of global warming, then we should only emit 2 tons of CO2 equivalent by 2050. So it's quite a huge reduction we target. And we have seen in the previous event how to reduce these emissions in the transport, housing, and food sector. And today we will have a more global perspective with how we can better spend our money. So after this introduction about the carbon footprint, we will try to understand the link between wealth and impact, then try to understand how we can better spend our money in our daily choices, and finally, if we can better invest our money. So now I will let the floor to Joanna to speak about the link between wealth and impact.
Thank you, Ellery. So in this section, the first question that we ask, it's at a more global level. So what is the connection between the gross domestic product and our environmental footprint? And in this particular study, we study, well, the authors study especially the consumption-based carbon emissions. And we see that there is a positive correlation on a global scale, which is also quite intuitively thinking that countries that produce more and have more economic activity would also need more electricity and would produce more emissions at the end. And we also see that in Europe, so most of the European countries, and especially Luxembourg, you can see here, it's on top of the map. So we have both a high GDP per capita, but also consumption-based CO2 emissions, meaning not only the emissions that are generated inside the territory of the country, but all the emissions that are caused because of the consumption of the citizens. So now the question comes, if we want to stay under and to limit the global warming, how we can decouple this economic growth from the environmental impacts that it causes. And here it's a study mainly for the European countries, which also looks at more environmental impacts besides CO2 emissions like land use or resource use. And what this decoupling would mean would be, for example, how we see here that the gross domestic product grew with 8% in the studied period. And the decoupling would mean that emissions are decreasing over the same period, or the environmental impact. And what we saw here is that the domestic footprint dramatically decreased, this meaning the emissions generated inside the territory. But however, the consumption footprint was stable and even increased from the period after the crisis. So this means that domestically the EU was successful in decoupling from the environmental impact, but over the last years emissions still increased. And now looking more specifically at individual countries, in this graph we see how different countries are doing, and in the red ones that you see on the right, there will be no decoupling, meaning that at the same time that the gross domestic product grew, also the impact grew, or even more than the GDP grew. And we see that Luxembourg is in this category where emissions and other environmental impacts have been increasing even at a higher rate than the GDP. And then we have the relative decoupling, where emissions and other impacts grew, but less than the GDP. And then countries where, let's say, we should all aim to be, that achieve the absolute decoupling, meaning an increase in economic activity and in GDP and a decrease in environmental impacts. And now to move to the section discussing more the individual impacts, we look at how we do at an individual level. And the question is, what is the share of greenhouse gas emissions of the top 10% income owners globally? So meaning the richest 10% of the people are responsible for which percentage of greenhouse gas emissions? And the answers, possible answers, are 20%, 34%, 48%, or 62%. So similar to the previous question, just select the answer that you think is the right one and submit it, so that we see what the public thinks about it. It may take a while until the vote is registered, so we are a bit patient to wait for everybody to vote. Yeah, you can choose one of the answers. I hope it worked. Okay, so we see you're a bit divided. Now let's see, or yeah, you seem to believe that rich people are indeed causing a lot of emissions. Now let's see what the correct answer is. It's a bit slow. Okay, so indeed the top 10% income owners emit almost 50% of the global emissions. So this is quite a lot in proportion to what the bottom 50% are emitting. And in order to reduce emissions to the target that is needed under the Paris Agreement, it would mean that the top 1% would need to reduce their emissions by at least 30 times, while at the same time the bottom 50 could still increase their emissions. And what's interesting to note here is that probably most of us living in developed economies and having a job are already close to or in the top 10% income owners. So it's important to understand how our spending choices can actually influence and maybe help decrease emissions and environmental footprints. So now to look a bit at how our spending is correlated to emissions. Here we have the graph, the similar one that Elori showed you for the carbon footprint of the Luxembourgish citizen. So we saw that mostly the emissions are due to transport, housing, or consumption goods. And here, if we plot also the spending, we see that, for example, for transportation, we spend only 14%, but at the same time, they generate 25% of the emissions. At the same time, for services, we spend way more than we generate. So we see that depending on our spending habits and our lifestyle, basically, also the carbon footprint differs from citizen to citizen. And now the question is if there is a correlation between, here the study looks at greenhouse gas emissions and increase in expenditure. So how the level of income affects our emissions. And we look at the elasticity of the greenhouse gas emissions dependent on the increased expenditure. And here, for the given consumption categories, so also food or eating out, electricity, the authors looked at how the emissions are changing when there is increased expenditure in these categories. And for example, for food, there was an absolute decoupling, meaning that the more the expenditure increased, the less emissions came from this category. But at the same time, for many of the other categories, there was only a relative decoupling or no decoupling. For example, for eating out, which may in the end replace the category of food, or for mobility, there is no decoupling, meaning that emissions are increasing even more than at a rate even higher than the expenditure. Okay, so what may happen also when we increase our expenditure, even if we think sometimes that we become more environmentally conscious and maybe spend our money on greener products, we may also tend to spend more. So at the macro level, how the rebound effect would happen would be that if there is a technical progress, this would also lead to an increase in efficiency and therefore a decrease in the impacts per unit produced. But this also may lead to a rise in demand because of increased efficiency and maybe also decreased price, which also causes an increase in consumption and therefore increase in impacts. And practically, for example, I can buy a car with lower fuel consumption rate because I think it's better and more efficient, but at the same time, I may use my car more because I pay less for the fuel, which would be the direct effect. Or indirectly, I may use the savings to buy something else that may be even more have even more environmental impacts than the car, for example, buying a flight ticket, or with a systematic effect, if this would lead me to change my behavior. On the longer term, for example, I would move further away from my work because I have a lower fuel budget, and at the same time, I use the car every day more often. How can we try to think more and to avoid the rebound effects? It's first of all to see how we use these savings into low impact products. For example, buy a train ticket instead of a plane ticket, even if nowadays a train can be even more expensive than the plane. And also to remember that less is more, so to combine efficiency with frugality.
Okay.
Yeah, I will let Elori to continue.
Yeah, thank you, Joanna. So now we'll see a bit concretely what we can do in our everyday life to spend better our money. So the first thing is, can we trust environmental communication on products to choose the more eco-friendly product? So there are two types of environmental communication that should be distinguished. There are the self-declaration. So maybe you are recognizing here the 3 green arrows to say that the product can be recycled. So this will probably focus on only one single criteria, so one environmental issues like the recyclability or the biodegradability, and they are mostly not verified by third party. While eco labels, on the other side, they are always certified by third party, and they have a more comprehensive approach because they consider multiple environmental issues, and they also adopt what we call a life cycle approach, so considering the impacts all from the production to the disposal of the product. So probably you are recognizing now this eco label that are more trustful than self-declaration. So the European eco-label criteria, they are revised regularly by European directives with the objective to label only products that can have lower environmental impacts than conventional products in the same category, and also a safety aspect by the banning of hazardous substances in the composition of the product. So is it really better for the environment? And I will show you now the results of a European study. So with the example of a liquid soap, so the eco-label criteria will include the fact that we need to choose ingredients with lower impacts, in particular regarding their toxicity, the fact that you need to have a lighter packaging than the average with a certain amount of recycled content, and also a specific dosing system. So now, in terms of greenhouse gas emission, we can see that the bottom bar, which is the eco-label soap, has about 12% of reduction of greenhouse gas emission compared to the top bar, which is the conventional soap. And this is mainly thanks to the lighter packaging. So you can see this green bar is smaller for the eco-label soap at the bottom of this graph. So the authors also found other environmental benefits, not only in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but in terms of toxicity, use of resources, and so on. And they found similar conclusion for other eco-label products like the shampoo or the detergents. So we should try to favor the purchase of eco-label product if we can, and it will always generate an environmental benefit, even if sometimes it's quite marginal, there will be always a benefit. So this is a good thing to spend our money on eco-label products. Now we will open a new live poll to introduce the next topic. It's about second-hand products. So do you often buy second-hand? Yes, to replace the purchase of new products. Yes, to enrich my vintage collection. Rarely or no. So this is just to know a bit about your habits and see if you consider maybe environmental consideration or not in your daily purchase choices. So again, let's be a bit patient, but normally if we wait just a few seconds, we'll be able to see the results. The system is a bit slow sometimes, but it works normally. Okay, so it's a half a bit between yes and rarely. So, okay, you can buy second-hand, and now we will see what are the environmental impacts of buying second-hand. So when you buy a second-hand product, in fact, you only have the impact of reusing the product. So normally there is no reparation, so it's just a bit of conditioning, like cleaning, and the transport to the second-hand reseller. While if you would buy this product new, you will have all the production chain and the associated transport. So the impacts of reuse are quite negligible compared to the impacts of producing a new item. So this is really good to favor second-hand products. The only potential limitation is, are we really replacing the production of new items when we buy second-hand? And to illustrate this potential limitation, I wanted to show you the results of this survey in a second-hand shop in Italy. So they asked the consumer that just bought second-hand products if this would replace the purchase of a new product or not. So even if the sample is small, we can see that most of the people answered no. So in fact, you are not replacing the purchase of a new product, but just adding to what I called your vintage collection in the life bulb. So we should favor second-hand products, but again, we should not fall into the same problem of overconsumption when we do these kind of choices. So now we'll speak about durability, which is also linked with reuse. So it's quite common sense to say that a durable product has lower environmental impacts than a non-durable product because you will use it for a longer time. So this is just an illustrative graph, and you will avoid the production of a new product when a non-durable product will have its end of life. So it's good. The only potential issue is that normally durable products may have higher production impact because maybe they are heavier, they have more resistant materials. But here I show you the results of a study about vacuum cleaners, and they found that this additional production impact for a durable vacuum cleaner would be less than 10% compared to the non-durable one. So this is small and it's compensated by the longer use of the object. So what if our vacuum cleaner breaks? Should we repair it or replace it by a new one? Again, the reparation impacts are small generally compared to the impact of producing a new vacuum cleaner, so we should favor reparation instead of buying a new product. But what if we replace it by a more efficient vacuum cleaner? It means that the vacuum cleaner will consume less energy during its use. And in that case, there could be a threshold where it's better to buy this new vacuum cleaner. So the authors found that from a perspective of greenhouse gas emissions, if the new vacuum cleaner has an efficiency gain above 25% compared to the old one, then it's better to replace it. And they found similar results for other environmental impacts, but not for all of them. For example, the use of natural resources is mainly influenced by the production phase, not by the use. So it will always be better to extend the lifetime in terms of resources rather to replace it by an efficient product. So if we want to generalize this outcome for production intensive items, so the fact that the impacts are higher during the production than the use phase, like furniture, clothes, or even our smartphones, it's always better to extend the lifetime of our products. So we should favor durable, repairable products or have a preventive maintenance to extend their lifetime. For use intensive items, so products that consume a lot of energy during their use, like the washing machine or even a bit our vacuum cleaner, then we can envision to replace it, but only if there is a significant gain in terms of efficiency. And for that, you can rely on the European energy label to check if there is or not a significant energy gain. But keep in mind that this could reduce, for example, greenhouse gas emissions, but not all environmental impacts like the use of resources, as I just said. So now there is a new trend which also increased with the COVID pandemic, which is online shopping. So the impacts of online shopping has been also quite debated in public media. And now I will show you the results of a study from last year who compared 3 types of shopping in UK. The first scenario in blue is a traditional shopping. So the consumer will go to a retail shop with different types of transport mode to buy the product. Then the yellow scenario is called bricks and clicks. So the consumer will order online, but always via a retail shop. And then it will be delivered by a van to the house. And finally, what they call the pure players in grays are when you order online, but it doesn't go through a retail shop, but via a parcel distribution center. So now, in terms of carbon footprints, here are the results. where you see the diamond is the average value and the length of the bar represents the uncertainty of the results. So we can see that in general, the gray bar, the gray result, generates higher greenhouse gas emission than the two other scenarios. This is because we have higher impacts in terms of transport, because the distance is higher between parcel distribution center and your house, generally, than between the shop and the house. There is also a smaller basket size when we do such order compared to, for example, traditional shopping, and a higher rate for failed delivery. There is also more packaging when we go through a parcel distribution center than through a retail shop. Now, if we compare the blue and the yellow bar, we can see that traditional shopping in blue tends to have higher greenhouse gas emissions. This is because in UK there is a quite high share of consumers using their cars, about 80%. So this conclusion might not be true if you are in a country where people use less the car, like in the Netherlands or even in China. So the results are quite uncertain because they depend a lot on various factors like the basket size, the distances, the transport mode, etc. And we cannot really conclude what is the best from an environmental perspective, ordering online or going to a traditional shop. What we can do is to provide some recommendation to know how we can reduce our impact into each of these channels. So if you go to a traditional shopping, you should prefer low impact transport modes. So in particular, avoid using private car, or if you cannot, then trying to use your car for multiple purposes. For example, go shopping when you return from work. If you want to order online, then it's better to bundle items, so to buy from several products from the same suppliers with the same delivery pattern and delivery date. Also, fast delivery should be avoided because they tend to increase the environmental impacts. And for companies, so not at the consumer level, they should implement more electric cargo bikes. So we have still a lot of uncertainty behind the use of online shopping. For example, it's commonly known that there is a higher return rate for online channels, but also there are more unsold products for traditional retailing. So the balance of product losses between these two channels is not really set. And we do not really know if when a consumer shop online, it will really avoid a trip to a traditional shop. So for example, if you order online, do you go less often to a supermarket? So we have spoken until now about reducing our environmental impact, but there is a last option, which is trying to compensate our impact. And this can be done for greenhouse gas emission with what we call carbon offset. So it was mostly implemented for flights. So the idea is that when you take a plane, you will generate greenhouse gas emissions and you want to pay to remove the equivalent amount of emissions. So the first thing to know is that air companies have different calculation methods to calculate the emissions of a flight. So sometimes they only look at CO2 emission during the flight. Some will include the one to supply the kerosene, or other websites will include non-CO2 global warming effect. Then for offset, you can invest in a project that will capture CO2 from the atmosphere via reforestation, or into low carbon technology that will reduce the emission compared to the current situation. So for example, investing in renewable energy to replace fossil fuels. So these carbon offset projects can be validated by standards like the gold standard or the verified carbon standard. And this is how a company can offset their emission, or we can offset our emissions. So we will open a new live poll to test a bit your knowledge and see what you think. So how much you think it would cost to offset the annual carbon footprint of an average Luxembourgish resident. So it's about 15 tons of CO2 equivalent, if you don't remember. So between 100 euro to 400 euro, 1,000 to 4,000, 10,000 to 40,000 euros, or 100,000 to 400,000 euros. So you might not know the answer, but just guess and try, and we will see. Or maybe we have some experts with us that know the average price of carbon. So again, let's wait a bit, and yeah, in a few seconds, we can show the results of the poll. Okay, so most of you think that it's between 10,000 and 40,000. Okay, let's see what is the right answer now. I think you will get a small surprise. And the right answer is between 100 and 400 euros. Quite a small amount. So can we really rely on carbon offset to become carbon neutral? In fact, there are several limitations. The first one is the temporality. So when you take a flight today, you will emit emissions today, but the carbon offset project will remove or reduce emissions in the future. And to illustrate this, I show you this graph where we see how much a pine forest can store carbon dioxide for a period of 100 years. And what we can see is that the first 20 years, it doesn't store much carbon dioxide. So you need, for example, to avoid that there is an incident like a fire during this period, to not to cancel this carbon offset project. Then there are various schemes. So I just cite two standards, but they are quite complex and we don't know always all the calculation behind, so it's not always transparent. So we are not 100% sure if we are really offsetting the emissions we want to offset. Then we could consider that it's an incentive to not reduce emissions. So if I can always offset my emission, why should I change my behavior to reduce my impact on the environment? And we have seen that the price is quite cheap, so it's quite accessible to everybody to buy carbon offsets. So it's a danger to rely only on carbon offsets. And also the carbon offset project will create other issues in terms, for example, of biodiversity if you don't plant the right trees, or for example, if you invest in renewable energy, it will still use natural resources and could create scarcity issues. So this concludes this part on purchasing option. And now I will let the floor to Joanna to speak about the last part on investment.
Thank you. Yeah, so now we found quite a lot about how our direct spending choices can actually be green or not so green, but also the way that we invest and save our money can have an indirect impact. So we start again also with a poll. Yeah, so the question is if you considered environmental labels or maybe any environmental criteria when you made the purchase, or when you chose an investment plan, or here could be also when you chose your bank, for example. And the answers are yes to buy a labeled consumption good, yes to choose a greener investment plan, yes for both, yes, so we thought about it but I have not yet taken action, or no. So you can choose depending on your habits, and we will see how it is. The same procedure, just choose the one that fits you and then submit it, and we will wait for the answers together. Let's see. Okay, so we see that quite a few of us considered it for buying consumption goods, and good to see that some also considered it for their banking or investment products. So now let's talk more a bit about the investment products and banking. We had the poll. So since we're here in Luxembourg, we also looked a bit at how much a Luxembourgish usually saves. So we see it has quite a large share compared to other European and OECD countries. Around 15% of the income of a Luxembourgish after taxes is being saved. And where can this money go when it's saved? Yeah, so it can Oops. Okay, now it's loading. So for most of us, or the most traditional options would be right to have a bank deposit at a bank or to transform the money into a better currency, and maybe to make voluntary payments to a pension or an insurance fund. And other more investment oriented would be either to invest in company shares or to invest in a mutual fund, so a fund that takes money from more investors and invests them on their behalf, or even, for example, Bitcoin would also be such an investment. And the question is, what is the indirect carbon footprint that would be generated because of where this money is working and what it is financing? And we first talk about the savings at the bank and what the bank does actually with money that would be in a savings account. And we see that when we wonder that, it's not really easy, or it's quite impossible to actually know. But more and more banks, at least large banks in the EU, will have to disclose the sustainability information on their financial products that they offer, so mostly for investment products. And why is this important? Is because banks are still financing largely operations from fossil fuel companies, and with this money, companies can continue to invest in maybe assets that are not aligned with the climate goals. And here I took from the cited report on the side a few banks that are quite present also in Luxembourg, but across Europe as well. And even if through their disclosure and their commitments, they appear to be leaders in terms of disclosure, they are also financing corporations that are investing in fossil fuel. And only in 2019, there were $62 billion US invested in financing fossil fuels from these banks, so either through loans or through investing in these companies. And this is a trend that happens for the largest banks in the European Union. And this is despite that in 2015, the Paris Agreement was signed, and then also most of these banks also make pledges to reduce emissions and to achieve net zero. So it's also up to us as consumers to ask our banks where they invest the money that is in our savings account, and to try to understand better. And here in a study, this is especially for French banks from Oxfam and Carbon for Finance, they looked at what would be the indirect impact of a 10,000 euro deposit in the banks that you see listed here. So this would mean that you have 10,000 euro at the bank, and at the same time the bank makes loans or invests in other companies. And based on their portfolio, the carbon footprint was on average around from 3 to 6 tons of carbon, right? And then if we remember the footprint, the direct footprint of Luxembourg citizen would be of 14.5 tons. So if we consider all the indirect impacts that would come from where our money flows, we can think that our footprint increases quite much. Now there are a few banking operations, let's say, and banking products that start to appear more and more, that we can decide actively to invest in or to choose in order to make our banking operations greener. For example, Spurkes offers an investment fund that invests only in companies that are trying to improve their environmental footprint. Other banks are offering savings accounts that promise to only invest the money in socially responsible companies. Then on the loan side, for example, a consumer can take a so-called eco loan, which would even have different different profile if it is only meant for eco-efficiency and green home improvements. And there are also banks that promise to only invest and finance companies that are focusing on environment or also on social aspects. So here, how can we take more control over the sustainability of our banking operations? It's first to get more informed about the environmental profile, because in general, financial information is more secret in a way, let's say, but also it's not so common that we would wonder about the environmental impact. More than that, to know that we can actively decide how to invest the money that we save, or even, for example, in our pensions or savings account. But at the same time, because there is this high increase in sustainability and people are more and more concerned, there are also banks that try to, let's say, take advantage of this, and there can also be products that look like they are or they are marketed as being green, but may have hidden fees that are not justified. So we have to inform ourselves even more. Now, when it comes to investments and to see how our investments can actually have an impact, we start from here, from the left, where it's us, the people. So either we are small investors or so-called high net worth individuals, so persons with high amounts of money. Maybe that would be the 1% that we looked at before. And one can invest their money either by buying shares directly in companies. So you have here, for example, some fossil fuel companies, or by investing in mutual funds, which will in the end use this money to also invest in other companies. And what all of us do also is to contribute to a pension or to even to an insurance fund, and these funds are also then reinvested on the financial markets and end up supporting the same big companies. So what is key in order to be sure that we achieve the environmental goals is also to see how finance can actually be more aligned, and how funds that are usually going to fossil fuel companies, for example, can be redirected to greener companies. And here, for example, taking the case of Luxembourg solely, we see that even if they are, let's say, pioneers on one side, because they have the first green exchange, meaning that they only list financial instruments that have green that have green attributes. Luxembourg is also one of the largest places for funds domiciliation, and the study of the 100 largest funds in Luxembourg saw that they are indirectly responsible for emissions that would correspond to 4 times the national emissions of Luxembourg. So in the end, the power of money to actually direct where this emission goes should not be overlooked. And also, these funds would be aligned with 4 degrees of warming by 2050. So this means that also investment funds and pension funds have to redirect their money to sectors and companies more aligned. And now, just to give you a bit of context, it is true that investments at the beginning only care about profit, and an investor in general should not care about any environmental impact. But since the investment world is also connected, of course, to the economy and the society and the bigger ecosystems, more and more funds and investors are starting to consider the so-called ESG factors and ESG risks, which represent environmental, social, and governance risks. And in this case, they do it mostly from a financial risk perspective. So if a company would be exposed to an environmental risk, they would try to not invest in it because they may have financial losses at the end. So this is also a greenwashing risk sometimes, because ESG is now more of a buzzword, and we can see a lot of investment products labeled as ESG, even if maybe they only take into account the financial impact that this environmental risk would have, or they just put some environmental filters that in the end do not ensure a sustainable investment. What we can be sure would be the real investments that we can call sustainable would be the impact investments, so investments that are trying to actually achieve a positive social or environmental impact. And we see that these are more, they are closer to maybe philanthropic donations or charity, because you care more about the environmental or the social impact than about the profit. And more also the same European regulation is starting to ask financial market participants and investment product providers to disclose if their funds are impact funds or sustainable ESG funds. So if they are only considering sustainable risk or if they actually have sustainability as an objective. And maybe the issue is that we see in this graph, the light green are all the funds in Europe that say they integrate ESG factors, whereas with the small green line, you see all the funds that aim to achieve an impact. So that is very, very little compared to the total universe of sustainable funds. But just as in the case of consumption products, sustainable finance labels are starting to develop in order to be able to label and to make the consumer, to make it easier for the consumer to choose a fund or a financial product that would be sustainable or that would be according to their values. So here it's an example from Luxembourg, which is the Luxembourgish labeling agency for investment funds. And here they divide between ESG and environment, climate, or microfinance labels. But at the same time, we see that there is a very little increase in climate or impact labels and a large increase in ESG labels. And at the same time, similar to the eco-label for products in Europe, the eco-label for financial products is under development currently in Europe. So, for example, if we look more practically at the pension funds, so here that would be in Luxembourg, the Fonds de Compensation, they manage a large amounts of money, and they do claim now that 90% of their funds take into account environmental, social, and governance criteria. But only one of these funds can be called an impact fund because it invests directly in companies that aim to bring an environmental impact, so that are related with environment. But at the same time, our pension contributions are exposed still to large fossil fuel companies. So here are a few examples of the companies that the pension fund of Luxembourg is investing in, and these are some of the companies that are the largest carbon emitters in the world. And at the same time, an analysis from last year showed that the total portfolio of the pension fund is not aligned with the 2-degree warming target. Of course, this is, from one point of view, very bad for the environment, but second of all, also means that all these financial assets are exposed to risks that can come from climate change. And now in terms of mutual funds, a study of retail funds, so funds that are available to individuals, showed that also impact funds fail to actually prove their impact claims, and it is not clear for consumers what impact their funds are achieving. This is why we have to have in mind more things when choosing our investment funds. And first of all would be to take into account that a good ESG rating, so even if we see a company as a leader, does not guarantee that it is a green investment, so does not guarantee that over the life cycle, this investment and the specific companies that the fund invests in are actually bringing a green impact. At the same time, there are a lot of labels that are out there, and they do have different eligibility criteria. So even when we see a fund that is labeled, it is better to actually check what this label stands for. So for example, the two labels that you see on top actually ask funds to report on sustainability indicators, while others may be recommended, but it is not a mandatory requirement. And at the same time, there are different websites and possibilities for consumers to actually check the exposure of funds to maybe fossil fuel exploration in this example, but there could also be exposure to other types of activities, maybe weapons or other what would be ethical investments. So there are quite a few things to take in mind, to take into account before choosing where to invest. And now what I wanted to say in the closing of this one is that we also saw that now in the COVID period, maybe for most of us, the savings and the savings rate increased because we couldn't spend so much as before. The question is where are we gonna put all this money that we saved? And it was generally seen over history and throughout history that after a period of crisis, actually the spending, and then also this, because this is connected to the emissions really rebounded and increased a lot. And now we know that this is not something that we can afford, let's say, as a society. So we have to make sure that our spending becomes greener. And just that maybe we will see more and more this notification, hopefully, let's say, appearing, telling us if when our spending is not green enough. Now I will let Elori to close up the session, and then we will go to questions.
Yes, indeed. Let's conclude this presentation with some takeaway messages. So we have seen in the beginning that generally, when we are richer, we have more environmental impacts, but it's possible to try to decouple these two factors, even if it's difficult and maybe only to a certain extent. So what we can do in our daily purchasing choices, we can favor durable and repairable goods. So this is a good option. It will maybe cost more, but it's a good way to spend our money. Then we should favor second-hand products, but in the perspective to avoid the production or the purchase of a new product. So this is in line, so these two first principles are in line with the 5R principle that I put below. So first to refuse consumption, then to reduce it, reuse as much as possible our products, repair them if they break, and then if we cannot at all repair them, then dispose them, but for recycling. Then we have seen that eco-label products can be a good option to reduce our environmental impacts. We can choose to shop online, but it will have an environmental benefit only if it's really to avoid high impact individual transports. And finally, we have seen that carbon offsets could be an option, but we need to keep in mind that we should first reduce our emissions, and there are still some limitations behind such concept of carbon offsets. Then concerning our banking accounts, the first thing is to get informed. So now, as Joanna said, banks should report sustainability related information, so you can already check that. Maybe there is still a bit of greenwashing because we are still waiting for some labels, and ESG criteria are sometimes a bit too broad and not enough quantitative. But still, if then you have enough information, then you can act and try to not only favor financial return, but also environmental impact. So with the impact-driven investments, and choose maybe banks that you trust are more environmental friendly. So we think that such investment and such choices of our money and savings could send a strong message to the market and make the financial sector greener. So with this, I will end the presentation, and we can go through the question and answer session. So I will check if we already, so we already received some question, and I will go through it one by one. So the first question from Mike Mosley is, did the consumption goods include digital products like video streaming, cloud storage, etc.? Yes, indeed. So we include the impact of internet in general. So with the fact that there are data centers and so on due to the use of internet, so we include that. maybe I can just go back to see in which category, but it's included, yes, in IT here. So it's both the production of our electronic equipment, but also internet use. Okay, I will just go back to the first. Now, so unfortunately, we cannot really interact with you orally, but if our answers are not satisfying, then you can just write again a new comment or a new question. So was the decoupling in the slide 11 due to increased outsourcing of production to developing countries? So I will go to slide 11. Oh, sorry. So here, yes. So exactly. So we see here that, as Joanna said, we have a decreased domestic footprint, but not so the consumption footprint is still equal. So it means that we are importing more than we are producing in European countries. Joanna, do you want to say something on that question?
No, I think that's it. So I think indeed it is because we consume more than we can actually produce domestically. So imports are now considered. If we consider imports, actually the footprint is higher.
Yes. Yeah, so we have Europe has outsourced most of its production since decades. So we have a decrease of the domestic emissions, let's say, on the territories. But in fact, this pollution is displaced in other countries, especially in Asia, for example. But if we consider the consumption, so we consider the imports and the consumption in each country, then the results is not the same. So we have a stable consumption footprint. So this is a result for an aggregated score, not only greenhouse gas emission, but an aggregated score of different environmental impacts. Okay, so maybe we can move on to the next question. On slide 14, what are the main factors which make the top 1% bar so high? So here, Joanna, do you want to answer this?
I'm not very sure of the correct answer, but yeah, for sure is also because of owning a lot of more intensive assets and maybe having habits that emit more than a middle income owner. But maybe Laurie, you know more about the specific categories.
I think that one of the most correlated, let's say, spending habits that has a higher impact is, for example, the flights. I think only 10% of the global population already took a flight in the world. So if you are richer, if you are in the top 10 or in the top 1%, then you tend to take more the plane, and this has a huge impact compared to other transport modes. So this is one behavior that is really, let's say, elastic, so correlated with environmental impacts. And we have also, for example, factors like the house. So you tend to have a bigger house and you consume more energy, you have more equipment, so you will have more, I don't know, electronic equipment if you are richer. So all of this is related to the environmental impacts you will have. Is slide 16 a global trend or for one specific country or continent? So maybe slide 16. Yes, indeed, we didn't put the country. So this was for a specific country.
I think it is Switzerland, or
yes. Yes, sorry, we forgot to put the country. So it was for Switzerland, I think, yes. So it's just an example. It's not a general conclusion, but it was interesting to see that, for example, food is less. So if you spend more in food, it's less correlated to an increase of an environmental impact. Because, for example, richer people maybe will tend to eat less meat. This is a possible conclusion. While they will eat more outside in restaurants, and when you eat outside, normally you generate more waste, so it has a higher impact. So maybe these two effects are compensating each other. So this is not a global study. It's just an example on a country, and I think it was Switzerland. Sorry, we forgot to precise this. Now there is a question from, sorry for the pronunciation, Ausra Jurkevičiūtė. Sorry. Is there an open public carbon footprint calculator per Luxembourgish inhabitant or Luxembourgish family available, which would also come up not only with an annual or monthly footprint, but also with recommendation for reduction? I have seen one for the UK, but it's not applicable abroad. Thank you. Yes, unfortunately, there is no specific calculator for Luxembourg. There are some that are for UK, for France, also more at the global scale, but we don't have tools yet that are specific to Luxembourg. But you can already have an idea, let's say, by using the others. Of course, it will change because, for example, we don't have the same electricity mix in Luxembourg and in UK and in France, etc. And we don't have the same supply chain behind and so on. But you can still try to use other carbon footprint calculators that are available online. You will find some, and it will still give you an order of magnitude, and some of them also give you some recommendation to decrease this carbon footprint. So we hope we also give you some recommendation within our events, but it's true that it's not specific to you. Okay. Now, Stefan Chorus asks, is there a correlation with growth of worldwide population and CO2 emissions? Joanna, do you want to take this question?
Sure. I mean, we didn't put any study on that, but I'm sure there is, of course, because when we think about it, every additional person means additional emissions. There are even studies that look into how to reduce emissions and suggest that people should have less children in order to reduce emissions per capita. So I think they are correlated. But of course, we see that inequality is present as much in carbon emissions and in environmental impact as it is in wealth. And therefore, yeah, depending on where the population increases more, the impact would increase or increase at a lower rate. But for sure, they are correlated. And it's also correlated with what we started now and how the emissions are actually due to humans and global warming. So we have to know that, you know, continuing like this, it's not gonna help the environment much. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I was just showing this to say that, yeah, there is indeed a majority of the world population which, let's say, is below the threshold of 2 tons of CO2 equivalent. Yes, it's not the same depending on the country. If you increase the population of a rich country or a poor country, but of course, developing countries want to imitate the lifestyle of Western countries. And I think it's our responsibility as Western countries to try to change this and to have a lifestyle which is more in line with the planetary boundaries. So there is a link for sure, but we need also to tackle this inequality issue. Mike says, thanks for the answer. I guess the top 1% may include Elon Musk sending rockets into space too. Yes, but it's also probable that there are a lot of people in Luxembourg that belong to this top 1% richer, so we don't realize really how much we are rich sometimes, because we compare to other citizens within the same country, but at the global scale, it's highly probable that the majority of Luxembourgish people with a job belong to the top 10%, and some of us to the top 1%. So yeah, it was just to say that yeah, the top 1% is not necessarily only billionaires. There are also sometimes, let's say, normal people, but in rich countries that have, let's say, a comfortable salary. But of course, we can try to be rich and more responsible, but it's not always easy. So we do not have any more question. I will just wait one minute to be sure that there is no other question. And if there is no other question, then we can close this session. But it was really nice to have you. I hope that you learned something during this webinar. And yes, as I said, you will receive in a few days the recording of this webinar, so the link to the YouTube video, also a link with the presentation slide, so you will have all the information and the sources. And yes, the satisfaction survey, so it will be very nice if, again, you can fill this survey so that we can improve for the next events. So if there is no more question, then I will thank you again. Thank you, Joanna. And yes, see you for another event.
Thanks for attending. Have a nice evening. Bye.
Bye.